Welcome to the Texas School Safety Center Learning Lab. I am Celina Bley, the host, and I am here with our guest expert, Kate Shaw from Mansfield ISD, and you are the Threat Assessment Coordinator. And for our viewers, I just want to give everybody a quick little synopsis of what school behavior threat assessment is in Texas. It has started in 2019 with Senate Bill 11, which was one of the largest school safety bills that we had here in Texas. And it is a process to identify, assess, and provide interventions for students who are on the pathway to violence. And we have now been doing I think we're in our fourth year here in Texas. And every campus, we have over 9,000 campuses here in the state, must be supported by a school behavioral threat assessment team. They have to be trained by either us here at the Texas School Safety Center or an ESC. And probably the most important thing is they need to look at these students, collect dots is how we train, and see if they connect and see if the student is on the pathway to violence. There is in law very specific identifying behaviors that we train on that you look at. And the reason why we have you here today, Kate, is because y'all in Mansfield are really working on that intervention piece. And in our fourth year, when we go out throughout the state, we have realized that school districts are struggling with that operationalizing piece. How do we ensure all of our team members are trained? How do we train our students? How do we train our staff? But the other piece that we're really finding out, and that's fairly common for states in year 4, is that intervention piece. So what I want to hear from you first is, how do you all train your students and staff on a threat assessment, or that there's a threat assessment process in general in your district?
So we train all admin, counselors, and SROs that are on our campus, because we have a police department in-house.
Okay.
And we train all of them on the threat assessment process and what we expect for them to report. So we use what y'all have, and also we kind of get into a little bit more details specifically for our districts. So one of those things in the Senate Bill 11 is fighting. So we look at group fights. We look at premeditated fights. And so we kind of look at, okay, is this a predatory type behavior or is this a reactive type of behavior? So we go through those with our students. We're actually working on a training that we're going to try to do next year. But right now what we have is something called Our House, which is a push and a movement forward to try to give all staff and students and even parents a platform where everything is. So we have our bullying stuff on there. We have our threat assessment stuff on there, online concerning behaviors, and Crime Stoppers. And on that, it explains, hey, this is what would fall under bullying. This is what's going to fall under threat assessment. So we're trying to move towards this taking ownership of our district and the kids being part of the whole see something, say something. But now we have a little spot. It's on every Chromebook. It's on everything. It's a little emblem, and they can click on it, and it's a one-stop shop. And it also has counseling resources. So
it's a reporting as well.
Mm-hmm.
So let's jump to, there has been now a report made.
Mm-hmm.
So walk me through your process. And I'm going to say there's been a report made at a middle school. So how does that work? And I'm assuming, I don't know if it's different at a middle school, an elementary, or a high school, but let's talk about a middle school. Or you can let me know if they're the same at all of them.
Same process.
Okay.
So every campus, and we have about 49 campuses, every campus, all their admin, their counselors, and their SRO are all part of that team. So, but anyone can make a threat assessment. And how our reporting system goes is that once one's made and they put what school they're at, everyone that's assigned to that campus and any district level team is going to know, hey, an assessment has started there. So we open it, we look at what it is. Let's, for this sake, say this is obviously something we need to investigate, and it's not a report that's unfounded or something along those lines. So then the campus administrators take care of whatever they need to take care of safety-wise in that immediate moment, and as well as bringing that kid in. If they need to do a property search, they can do that, and letting the parent know, hey, a threat assessment process is being started for this. If we need to, one of my staff, which is an analyst, can go and do an interview at that point and start talking to the student. Most of the time we try to call our parents first and say, hey, and get some background information that we're prepared when we go and talk to students, that we have that information already. Hey, is there any concerns at home? Is there anything going on? Those types of questions. And we have set questions that we ask. Then we talk to the student, we send out staff questionnaires, and we get all of that information. And then once we have all of that, we also look at discipline, attendance, and grades. And we bring that information together to answer our large assessment question, which includes those components from the 11 Secret Service questions, and also strengths and weaknesses, or inhibitors or indicators, I think is what it's called.
Okay.
But basically, it's strengths and weaknesses. So from all that information, what did we find that is weighing on a student or that is concerning for that pathway to violence? And what did we find that are supportive? So what are those pillars that are keeping this kid up? And if we have a student that has a lot of weaknesses or has a lot of things weighing on them and not a lot of strengths, that's part of our intervention plan. Once we figure out whatever the level of concern is based on that pathway of violence is, okay, maybe the student doesn't have coping skills. Maybe the student doesn't have anyone they trust at the campus. So as part of that intervention team, how do we build those pillars back up? How do we build that support system so that way when something bad happens, because we all know we can't stop every bad thing happening for a student, that they have pillars that are holding them up even after our threat assessment's over, that they don't turn to violence for the next thing. Now, we also have safety plans. So if we need to keep two students away from each other, if we need to refer out for outside resources, if we need to work with parents to come in and meet with on a certain topic or item, then we can do that. But every case is different. So you have to kind of figure out what's best in each situation.
So one of the things that you mentioned was that intervention plan. And I think I'd like to know a little bit more about, so we've let's just say we've closed the case. We have found the student isn't an immediate threat. We know this is the issue. The student needs some counseling, and we want to refer to counseling. And let's just say the referral is through our own counseling. Mm-hmm. What is the process and the mechanism that y'all ensure that is taking place and following up? Sorry.
That's okay. I cough all the time. So if we're feeling that there is a need for an intervention due to some sort of violence, even at a low level, for violence, to be specific, not just a mental health concern, but for a violence thing, we're going to keep it open on our side. And so because we're implementing that intervention. And so that would be like a low, we're going to kind of check in.
Okay, so that's a good point. So the case is still open while the intervention is going on.
Yes.
And have you found that is across the board? Because I know you've worked in another district. So the case stays open while the intervention is still going on.
If there is a concern for violence. Now, we've had cases that are more concerned, like we spoke to a kid and they really need social services. Like there's something going on at home, there's some homeless stuff happening, and they need support from that area of our district. Then we make those recommendations and we follow up and do a warm handoff with that area and go, hey, they need these resources. But if we're concerned that without these interventions that there's still a potential for violence to self or others, then we keep that case open and continually monitor it.
So tell me about the continually monitor.
Yes.
Because I think that's hard.
So again, having worked in two districts, we use the same protocol for us for monitoring for each. So we use a level. So we have low, moderate, high, and imminent. And so that's kind of how we base on how often we check in with students or how often the campus team has to report how a student is doing. Okay. So if a case is a low, they have to report at least monthly. For a moderate, it's biweekly. For a high, it's once a week. And then for a imminent, it's twice a week that they have to report. Now, that does not mean only one thing's happening a month. That's just when they have to make sure they put something in the system of how is the student doing. So for our lows, we're looking at, hey, who's checking in with this kid? Every single one of our plans, someone is checking on that student, whether it be an admin, a counselor, a coach, someone, because we want to build those relationships. So should something happen, they have someone to go to. We try not to make that a punitive person or someone who might have to do punishment, but sometimes they're really close to their assistant principal, and that's a better person for them. So when it's a low, we normally ask that they at least be meeting with them every 2 weeks, or hey, set up that relationship where if you need something, come talk to me. And y'all just go and say hi in the morning, get a temperature check, see how they're doing, talk to their teachers. So we have a report. hey, is this getting worse? Is it getting better? What does that look like? And we're not letting someone fall through the cracks. Even if they are low, we're still checking, and we look at the discipline when those come up and see like, oh, has there been anything else? Is there any big grade changes versus you're high and imminent. You're on it because you're concerned. You're watching those. You're like, okay, are they following the safety plan? Are we checking those bags however often we felt like we needed to?
And that's, I think, also important because there are some students who we do find are imminent, and we've had districts where they have a one-on-one person with them.
We've had that too.
We've done that, but then we also know that there are some, like you said, they just need that support.
Yep.
One of the things that you said is they have to check in the campus team because, like you said, you have how many campuses?
49.
49. So that student is being monitored on that campus, and they have to check into the system. And then that's the system that you and your team then are also monitoring. So there's that kind of vigilance as well. What type of system is that y'all use specifically?
So it's through the software company is Laserfish or DocuNav.
Oh, so you use your own.
But we created our own. So our in-house developers and stuff, they built it out to fit really what we wanted.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that you had to train all of those people on how to use the system.
Yes.
How long did that take?
How long did it take, or how long till we got it? Because those are different answers. Having worked in 2 districts, there are also different answers.
Right.
So your first year, especially with a new system, is hard because the reality is that all of our admin and our counselors, they have to be in a million systems all of the time. One, who's going to be in charge of password resetting? I didn't know my job was going to be a lot of password resetting, but it is.
Okay.
And I had that in both districts. And what I did find working in my previous district was we first started on just Google Docs, and then they bought Navigate 360, which is one of those programs. And that program cost money, but it was something that was very user-friendly for them, and that was there was a much shorter learning curve when they went to that versus trying on Google Docs when there was 19 different forms that they were using.
Right.
So when they're looking at what type of forms or what type of system, how easy is it? I wouldn't say that we have the easiest form. We have 3 different links depending on what you want to look at. And so we ended up breaking it down to a 1-pager of like, here's the links that you need, here's how you log in, here's where you find this, here's what is next. But I probably get 1 call, if not 1 email a day at minimum of, hey, how do I log in? Hey, where do you find this? And so it's good for them to have someone to go to ask, because I can imagine trying to learn an entire system, trying to deal with an entire campus, and then not being able to get into a program that's supposed to walk me through this, and I can't log in.
Right.
So that's really important for other districts. But I mean, the first year is rough. And then normally the second year, you really start getting a hang of it, and then you get veterans and people who did a whole bunch of threat assessments, and then the second year is less rough, and then the third year is a lot easier. So
Right. And in that same system, like you said, you're monitoring those interventions as well. When does a case get closed?
So for us, and this is different for everyone, every case is going to stay open a minimum. Well, if we decide it needs monitoring, because some cases are unfounded, if we decide it needs monitoring, we keep them open for at least a month. Okay. So, and that is really because we understand that kids can probably mask things at minimum for a month.
Okay.
But where are we looking at after that? And then that changes depending on the level. Like our lows, the minimum's a month. But a moderate, they have to move down to a low. And then from there, they can be moved off. So they always have to work their way down before we take them off.
And I think we all know as well, schools work within a school year period, but we know that we all live beyond August through May. And so what is your process when a student either moves within another school, or it's the end of the year and we know we're going to have big groups of students moving up into other schools?
Okay, so there's a couple parts to that question. One, I work year-round, so I do follow-ups with parents over the summer, or if they come to summer school, then we'll do follow-ups like that. Now, they're not as frequent. We don't have as much really in-depth stuff because they're not at school. We don't have as much access, but at least someone's keeping an eye. We're kind of looking, if we're working with an outside agency that's working with that student, hey, Is this still working if we have that release of information back and forth? Moving schools. So we have a process of when we know a student's moved schools, we move that case over and we require that the teams communicate, hey, this is what's going on. These are the interventions. This is what's worked, not worked. That's a huge thing. And making sure that they're prepared. At the beginning of this school year, we sat with every team and went, okay, here are the kids that are coming.
Right.
Here's what you need to expect. Here's what the previous campus did. Here's what the last campus did. If it was even cases that are just still at their campus, we went, hey, this is how we ended last year. Are y'all still able to put in these same interventions? Because the reality is you might have lost staff over the summer. You might not have them. And what if this new staff isn't trained in the same things? So making sure that whatever the plan is, that we can actually implement it. Because the worst thing to do is to have a plan and not be able to actually follow it. Because then we're liable should something happen. So let's make sure our plan is exactly what we say we're actually going to do.
So I think that's a good segue. How do you approach that challenge of intervening with trained mental health staff?
So this district, we have 6 licensed mental health staff that we call them support counselors. They're all licensed counselors. I'm a licensed individual, but most of my services aren't mental health focused versus instead of intervention focused or threat assessments. But whenever we go to like a licensed counseling that they're doing therapy type situations, we have a release of information that we either email or we send home with the student to get that signed before we ever go that direction, unless it's like a suicide assessment. And that is that crisis intervention that they will do. We're going to make sure that we get that done in the moment for the crisis, but we don't provide any services that are by a licensed professional for that type of service unless we have that parent consent. And we have one in-house that we can just send off.
How often do parents consent to that?
Actually, very often.
Okay.
So normally part of our assessment is one of the questions is, are you interested in counseling? So we also work with a agency that helps refer people out. Mansfield's is large, but it's probably like a lot of your smaller places that it might not have as many resources as other places have, especially like Parker County, those types of things. They don't have all of the resources, especially
any rural area.
Yeah, any rural area. And so part of Mansfield actually is really rural, and they might not have the funding. So this agency helps set them up and with people who they can afford or take their insurance, or if they don't have insurance, can help them with that process to refer them out. Or some of our people are like, I don't have transportation. So what do we do about that? And that's why we're lucky enough to have people in the schools that they can meet with and go, oh, this is an option. They're licensed. They're on the campuses. Do you want us to set that up? And giving the parent that option.
So how do you, you just mentioned something really interesting. You said there is a part of your district that's very rural. I think there's probably a part of your district that's more urban. Who keeps track of what all the resources are available? I mean, that's a whole undertaking in and of itself, I would imagine.
It is. It is a lot of an undertaking. So having that outside entity that we do contract with for counseling services is great. My background is I worked for the local mental health authority in this area, so I luckily had a whole bunch. But I'm also part of our local mental health authority, their monthly meetings. I work with the other districts around us, and I have currently a 37-page giant resource thing that is divided up on different types of resources, so like inpatient treatment for mental health, outpatient, things that work with schools, autism, parenting classes, homeless stuff, because anything that has come up that we're like, hey, we might need something for this, I just started to make a list. And sometimes other things come up and everyone is trained to go in here and add something should something else come up. So we try to have a very living document of
all
this is
the
what we
resources
have.
that are available.
And it can be really, if you don't know what you're looking for, you open that thing, you're like, I can't do this. Again, I would never send that to a parent because that would be so overwhelming. But for us, I can go, okay, I have this age, I have this kid, let me go to this section and see who takes this age.
And on that note, that also means you have a lot of students going out and getting assistance. And all of that information, though, I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly, then y'all require somebody to know that, to follow up, and to say this is where we're at.
If the parents will tell us that they went,
because
there's
to say that's another challenge.
Them going and them telling us they went, very different.
Right.
And that is a challenge, and that is a lot of that, building that good relationship. And I also know that sometimes parents are like, I don't want you in my business, and we're not going to tell you.
But that's also documented then.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
we made our assessment. This is what we feel needs to happen. You're also then just documenting, here's where we are. We recommended them here, parent declined coverage.
Yep.
That doesn't mean, though, that that student still doesn't need help.
Correct.
And so I'm assuming then that affects that case and the type of resources you're going to try to still provide at the school.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're lucky that we have a lot of a social emotional learning staff recently hired, actually this year, but they work with all of our campuses on how best to address social and emotional issues. So let's talk about it like in our younger grades, that they're more useful or they do more stuff there. They'll be like, hey, in this class we have some issues with kids not knowing how to express their anger. Well, then they go and they do a curriculum for that class on, hey, how do we express our anger? Or they can give them to the general or the educational counselor on that campus for a specific student. Hey, they're going through grief, and now that counselor can meet with that student, even though they're not licensed professionals for mental health, but they are trained, and they can go, hey, let's talk about grief, and they kind of have something to go through. So we kind of have those kind of workarounds. Sometimes parents still say no to that, and we have to respect that, but that's some other ways we try to, and at very minimum, we build those relationships and try to at least give them a safe person to go and talk to should they need it.
What, one of the things that we have also heard is not a lot, but there's still some people who are like, but there's a discipline. Like, we're not saying that threat assessment takes the place of discipline. We do know that sometimes there are actions that warrant a disciplinary measure. However, we always want to say, you can send the student off to the DAP, but that student's going to come back.
Yes, they do.
So, that's one of the things that we really want to talk about training. We're not saying that school behavior threat assessment says you don't put these students in discipline. A lot of times that's your student code of conduct. But the student is going to come back. So what do you do in the meantime? What do y'all do for maybe you don't do anything, but what do you do while we know the student's at, let's just say, the DAP. Mm-hmm. But we also know that was just a 36-day placement, and we know that they're coming back. So what would you do in that type of situation?
So we have our campus DAP. So, versus them going off like to JJ or something.
So you don't have a district DAP. You have a campus DAP.
No, we have a district one, but we will still be working with that student at that location. Okay. Now our DAP used to be called like the Behavioral Intervention Center because they have so many resources. It's really wonderful. So that way they get whatever mentoring, or if it's drug abuse, they have those types of things that they can
while
focus.
They're there.
Yeah, if that's what they need there. But we also make sure that if there's a safety concern and they're there, we're also working with that campus to make sure that they're safe while they're there. Now, given they get searched every day when they show up there, they have to wear a certain uniform. They're really strict over there. So then we have to prepare the campus for what happens when this kid returns.
When they return.
Because sometimes they're like, oh, well, they're not going to be back. I'm like, they're going to be back sooner than we think, so let's all be ready. Especially when they go off to like a hospital or something. People think, oh, they're going to be better when they return. Okay, no, probably not. Like, hopefully better than they were when they left, but we still need to support them when they get back. So it totally depends on where we are in the process when that removal happens. So if we find out about an incident, they go to DAP immediately, then we're going to work through our process. We're going to gather all those things. We're going to call the parent. We're going to go talk to that student that's at DAP.
Start collecting the dots.
We're going to collect and connect all those dots and go, okay, so what do we need to do? Is there a specific target? How do we keep them away from each other? Are there access to weapons? Do we need to do like safety searches? But making sure the campus is ready when they show up, it's not a surprise to anybody. People aren't like, oh my gosh, but they're like, okay, we're ready, we're prepared. And that also eases the district's anxiety of, oh my God, this kid's going to come back. They come back. We're in public school. That's Absolutely. What happens. And the best thing we can do is be prepared. Now, if it is a situation where we need to put them at a different campus, which we've had at times, and we've had at times where it was required, and we've had at times where that we met with parents and gone, hey, this was a pretty big incident, and we want them to have the best opportunity to move forward. And luckily, my district has multiple schools at the same level,
Right.
and we can go, hey, this school might be a better option, and give them that fresh start, to give them that opportunity to grow, because now all of these kids are kind of saying all of these things about them, and we could make it easier if he was somewhere else, or she, or whatever the
Right.
situation is.
A different learning alternative.
A different learning alternative, a different environment for them. So now,
But that's not every district.
no, it's
right?
not.
Let's be honest. I mean,
Yeah.
the majority of our schools are rural and the majority of them are small. What would you advise or recommend for, those smaller districts? I mean, I think one of the things that we always talk about is it's that intervention, continue to check in with the student. That's one of the things, regardless if we have school districts where they're K through 12 in one building. So there is no option, right? And there still could be that threat. But one of the things that we always want to really instill in our trainings, it's called behavioral threat assessment, because we all know that you see a change in behavior. And so we want to make sure that our staff is trained to understand if that behavior is changing. That's something we all want to be alerted to, especially if the student has a history of violent outbursts or a history of trauma. And, we want to make sure we know everything we can about that student. And so we want to ensure that somebody, kind of like you just said, is checking in on that student.
Yeah. And I mean, it's great. And we should do it no matter the size of the school. That is also saying their staff and their abilities and all
Right.
those things. My big thing is, if you're going to set them up with a mentor, because let's say you're one principal and one AP and you have K through 12, that might not always be possible that you're going to have time. And even in our big schools, that's not always possible. So if you are talking with a coach or a teacher or someone else that's checking in, that they're aware, hey, what are we looking for? What does that look like? What changes are we looking for? Or what type of concerns, if something's off, who to report that to, and what does that look like? And also noting the positive changes. Going,
True.
hey, this kid for the last 2 months has been great, and he's coming to school all the time, and his grades are up, and he joined the basketball team or a club or something, and going, okay, how does that now affect our management plan? Do we still need to be doing a daily check, or do we move that down? What does that look like? Because it's not discipline. And a big thing we do with our older kids who can understand is, hey, you can earn your way out of some of these things, but we need to see that pattern of positive behavior before we just, can we just go, oh yeah, no, it's been 2 months and you're doing exactly
It's
the same
fine.
thing and we're
Right.
out. So, I think it's hard regardless on the size. I think the small and the large have different problems, but problems nonetheless. And yeah.
One of the things that I heard, which was why we wanted to ensure that Mansfield was here, is that we learned that you all don't wait for a threat to happen. And so can you tell me a little bit more about what that means?
Yes. So at my previous training was right when this bill got passed, was when I started working under a grant at a different district. And so it was before really we had all the training from the Tech School Safety Center was really up and running yet. So we went through, I couldn't even tell you how many different types of threat assessment training. But one thing we really learned was that we are not waiting for someone to say, I'm going to do X, Y, or Z, and that there are warning signs that come up. This is really from Reed Malloy's type of research, and that there are people who are fixated on violence, and there are weapon-seeking behaviors, and there are isolating, and all of those risk factors that you find like in the Department of Homeland Security and the NTAC's journals that say, hey, something's going on. Because not in every case do they make a threat. Sometimes it is these smaller behaviors. So we look at, kids who are using certain types of fixation in their writing. They're writing about death and dying, sometimes killing, but not technically a threat. Really sexually violent behaviors that they're talking about or looking into. And we go, okay, so what is this behavior? And the big thing I really want to make sure is threat assessment is not saying this kid is a threat. We are assessing to see, are they on this pathway to violence? It is not punitive. We're not punishing them. We're going, okay, hey, this was a concern. Let's see what this is going on. Because sometimes we've had really small things like a little kid that pretends like he's shooting people in class. Now, that might be a little kid playing because he is playing cops and robbers in his head, whatever it might be. But no one else knew that was a game, and now this is something that happens. So we can look at it, and sometimes this is a game, and sometimes it's, oh, I'm really mad at everyone because they wouldn't be quiet, and I really want them all to die. Well, you don't know until you ask those questions.
Right.
Or you have your kids that are really interested in weapons. They're searching it a lot, so it kind of pops up on our radar because our monitoring program for technology is like, hey, this kid's like searching this stuff, and you're like, oh, okay. So you go and talk to them, and I've had some that they're in ROTC, and you're like, oh, that's why you're looking into this. And the others, they're like, oh yeah, I'm building a gun at home, and this is what's going on. And you're like, okay, well now we're gonna go down some different questions, but
Right.
not waiting for someone to say, I'm gonna do something, because they might have already said it to someone else. They just didn't say it to the right person to report it. But since all planned target attacks have leakage, someone says something, does something somehow, we have to look for those clues. And again, we're not saying that there's something wrong with them when we start an assessment. We're saying, hey, this is a concerning behavior. Let's figure out what's going on.
A lot of what you're talking about, how many students do you have at Mansfield?
Just under 50,000, I think.
So about 50,000.
My previous district, we were right under 80.
Right under 80.
Yeah.
So we're talking also about training our staff and knowing what to look for, right? I mean, they have to understand if you have a student who's writing multiple times about this is who you would then report that to. Would you say in general, if it doesn't feel right, it isn't, and that's something that it never hurts to make that report to the threat assessment team. Hey, this is a concerning behavior, and that's where we really feel like language is important. It's a concerning behavior. You're not making an accusation; it's a concern, and that's one of the things that we really feel like educators can understand. If it doesn't feel right, if you're reading something and you're like, that just does not sit well with me, that's a concern. That's something that you want to work with your team. But at the same time, your teams are dealing with a wide variety of how many concerns versus, hey, we have a kid who thinks there's a gun on campus.
Yep.
Right? So I think one of the things that we always want to continue to really ensure that districts are doing are training their staff. Because not only do they need to know what those concerning behaviors are, and what and when, but to whom, like you said. But also each district deals with that differently, and they have different processes. So we want to make sure that that's going on. How do y'all determine that interventions have been successful? Because I know a lot of times we're talking, oh my gosh, and a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, we're just dealing. We may never close a case on some of these students, but we also know that we do. A lot of times. All of the work you're doing most of the time. And so I think that's the other thing that we also want to talk about is threat assessment does work. And like you said, we provided pillars. I thought that was really great to help children stand up taller, better, with more support. And so again, how do you determine when an intervention plan has been successful?
So you said a couple of things, but I'm going to answer your question and then go back to the other things. But our big thing are we still seeing this concerning behavior? How are they, whatever the concerns we found, are they still occurring? So let's say you have a student who is isolating, who really hates everybody, who doesn't have a support system, but they only made a one-off comment. And so how you handle that is going to be different than your actively aggressive kids. And so when you're dealing with that and you're looking at, okay, how has this kid been doing? How are these updates looking? And they're like, oh, she hasn't said anything else. That's not concerning. Great. That's our first step. Hey, has she built some relationships? Is she talking more to someone? And so making sure that those other interventions of us trying to build relationships and trying to give her the tools to be more social, which is hard, but they have like social groups and stuff, especially at our younger grades, for lunch to try to build and help with that. are those working too? And so we're not just going, oh, hey, this kid made a one-off comment and now she stopped making one-off comments and so we're good. But are those other interventions being effective as well? Did I answer that question before I go back?
Yeah, go back.
So
Yes.
something you said was we had to train all of our staff. We trained every single teacher, bus driver, coach this year. At the beginning of the year, we made it a point to go to the campuses. And I mean, it was a 15 to 30-minute presentation at most of, it was one of the Sandy Hook videos, which is great. It's called Tomorrow's School Shooting. It kind of gets everyone's attention of, hey, why are we doing this? We play to that, and then we go over, this is what we do. This is not punitive, but our goal is to intervene at the lowest level possible. When you have a kid who is at that ideation stage, they get mad and they go, I want to kill someone or I want to hurt someone, that we're intervening there and we're not waiting for the planning or the preparation.
Right.
And if we can handle it there and you can tell us when that happens and we can intervene, that's a lot easier to handle than waiting for it to get worse. And because especially our younger grades, they're like, oh, well, they're young. Okay, well, what's that going to look like when that third grader becomes a middle schooler and they're having that same behavior, but we didn't take it seriously when they were in third grade.
Right.
So that was a big move. Hey, here's what we need you to report. Here's where we need you to report it. And for the districts that decide to do this, be prepared because you're also going to get some really weird things that get reported. You're like, how does this? But the big thing on that is we would then call the campus or show up on the campus and be like, can you tell me what exactly happened? Because some stuff gets put in. You're like, how did that make it to me?
Right.
And then they're like, oh, well, I didn't put this part. I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's the part that I need to know, and not just dismissing it first-handedly. The other thing, and this is one of my favorite things to say at every one of the trainings with staff, is the threat assessment is here so you don't have to make that decision. When something feels off, you by yourself, that teacher, that counselor, that administrator, they don't have to decide, oh, I know this isn't serious. I know they didn't mean it. I know this is just what kids do. We have an evidence-based process with staff who are trained to do this. Let us do it. Let us figure out, is this serious? Is this not serious? And does this kid need help? There's been a lot of stuff that got reported. I'll be honest that I'm like, oh, this is silly. And we go through the process and I'm like, oh, there's other things here, and this kid needs help. And that's what the process is for, not to get them in trouble or label them or anything like that, but to, one, don't put it on yourself. Let everyone else help you, because school safety is a shared priority. But also to help these kids not have to end up, in a really bad situation that they can't get themselves out of. We're the adults. We're seeing these concerns. Let us help. Let us intervene when we can.
Well, I don't really have anything else. That was perfect. Just because I think that is a very good synopsis of what the state is really wanting in our school system. And I know a lot of people we get asked why the schools. It's because we see these students every single day, and we do see them. We do know some concerning behaviors. One of the things that I was just really impressed by with another district is they understood exactly what you said. We're here to look at these concerning behaviors. And one of the things that they really wanted to know is who knows these children. And we were meeting with their team, and we heard, it was at an elementary school, and they had an art teacher there. And I was like, you're the first art teacher I've ever met on a threat assessment team. And she looked at me and she said, I know all of these kids. It was a K through 5 campus. She said, I see these kids for 6 years and I see all of their siblings. She goes, at least once a week, a lot of times more than that. And she goes, I'm generally the first one who sees when that behavior change occurs. That's why I'm on this, and the other person that they had was the campus receptionist. Because the campus receptionist knew all of the different kind of family stuff that was going on. And so if there were warrants out or restraining orders, and so this team was really able to come together and talk about the whole child, what is going on in the home with the student, with any siblings. And they really understood it is about catching them at their lowest level. And they really did a great job in understanding that we want to make sure that if there's any pillars that we need to support them, that they're going to have that so they'll go be successful in middle school and high school. And she said, we also understand we may have more assessments because of that.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, they feel like so many of the interventions and it was a very small district. They were like, but we also feel like we're able to provide that support that the families needed. And so I just really was very impressed because art teacher and receptionist is not on the list of who to the greatest extent practicable should be on that team. And they really understood that point of it is a behavioral threat assessment. We are looking to see if those behaviors change. And it's great to hear that Mansfield is doing the same thing. Is there anything else that you want to talk about that we haven't mentioned that y'all do in Mansfield?
Yes. Okay. So actually, something that Arlington ISD had put on is they've been joining all of the school districts in our area when we're in the Metroplex.
Okay. The Dallas Metroplex.
The Dallas Metroplex, sorry.
For those that don't know.
And so they invited everyone who had whoever's over their threat assessment. Now that some districts, that's the safety and security people. Sometimes that is a counselor. Sometimes they have staff specifically for threat assessments like Mansfield is lucky enough to have. Mm-hmm. And bringing them together and going, hey, how are y'all doing this? What does this look like? How are y'all communicating? But the big thing is, how are we communicating when one of our kids leave and they go somewhere else? And if nothing else, I think everyone should get to know the districts around them, what they're doing, and mm-hmm. being able to find that point of contact of, hey, heads up, this kid's coming, and having that process ironed out. Because I know everyone's still learning of how do we get this? How do we get interventions? And how do we do all that? What if all of that information you just gathered and that kid leaves and they go somewhere else, and now that team's having to start from scratch,
right,
in a completely different place?
Well, and the other things that we know that a lot of times on that pathway to violence, there's patterns. Mm-hmm. And so we want to ensure that all school districts know, was there a concern in third grade and then not one again until sixth grade, and were there interventions? And that's a really good point because there is no law that says you cannot share that type of information. Just isn't any system right now in Texas because threat assessment isn't as a part of any type of large systematic educational system database. And so one of the things that we always, sometimes we get administrators who are scared. They're like, we have the student, we've been working with the student, and we're concerned, we're providing this intervention, and he's about to leave us, not because he wants to go, but because dad got a new job. Mm-hmm. And so they're having to leave and can we call the other district? And we say, absolutely, you can. And you can call the other district and let them know, here were some of the things and here's what's worked with the student. Mm-hmm. Because it's also, we want to make sure that other campus is then also prepared to continue to support that student.
Yeah. Exactly. So that's been a big thing. That's the big thing we always talk about is like, hey, how are you sharing information? What does that look like? Because sometimes kids fall through the cracks, and that's the whole point is we're trying to keep that from happening.
Exactly. So. And I think the state is working toward that. Right now we're in early 2023, and we're wanting to make sure that, through the Department of Public Safety, through all of these other different programs, we want to make sure that every educator knows what they can do to assist students regardless of where they're at, and also how they can continue to work to support other districts when they're bringing them in or when they're sending them off. Well, Kate Shaw, thank you so much for joining us today on the Learning Lab. We look forward to hearing more about Mansfield. And I think another question that we've had because we started to do these podcasts is, can another district contact you?
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Yeah. Kate Shaw with Mansfield ISD. I know that you have a lot of these programs and you have a lot of these forms already.
And we happily share them.
And you happily share them. That's one of the things that school districts do so well. But, we have a toolkit on our website. We have trainings. But we also know that a lot of times, like you just said, in the Dallas metro area, you want to connect with one another. And so hopefully we can also get some of those also started in all the different areas.
Absolutely. So. Thank y'all for having me.